By the quiet waters of Riverside Park, a man most people wouldn't look twice at. Weathered coat, graying beard, eyes that had seen too many hard winters, was about to change, not just one life, but two. They say miracles happen in the most unexpected places. That morning, as young Timothy Zhang struggled against the river's fierce current, the world would witness one. Marcus Walsh, a man who hadn't heard his own name spoken in years, didn't hesitate. He dove into those icy waters without a thought for himself, guided by instincts that decades of hardship hadn't dimmed. What he didn't know was that Timothy's mother, Clare Zhang, was one of the world's most influential billionaires, and she was about to prove that some debts can only be repaid with the heart. What happens when the woman who has everything meets the man who has nothing but his soul to give? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Walsh had a morning routine that hadn't changed in 6 years. Each day began with the soft glow of dawn seeping through the worn canvas of his makeshift shelter, tucked away in a forgotten corner of Riverside Park, where the maintenance buildings cast long shadows. He kept his few possessions meticulously organized: a tattered journal bound in cracked leather, a pencil worn to half its original length, and his most prized possession, an army surplus coat that had seen better days, but still kept the chill at bay. The coat had been a gift from Mrs. Rodriguez, the owner of the small cafe at the park's edge. She'd noticed him that first winter, when his thin jacket offered little protection against the bitter wind. "My Eduardo was in the service," she'd said, pressing the coat into his hands. "He'd want someone to have it." Marcus had tried to refuse, but Mrs. Rodriguez wouldn't hear of it. That was her way, quiet kindness wrapped in gentle determination. Every morning Marcus would carefully fold his blanket, tuck his journal into the coat's inside pocket, and make his way to the public restroom. Before the joggers and dog walkers began their daily parade, he'd wash his face, comb his graying beard with careful dignity, and straighten his clothes as best he could. In the mirror's scratched surface, he sometimes caught glimpses of the man he used to be, the successful architect whose designs had once graced the covers of professional magazines. Those memories felt like scenes from someone else's life now. 20 years of building dreams in steel and glass, all undone in a single year of cascading misfortunes. A project gone wrong, a lawsuit he couldn't afford to fight, a reputation in tatters. He'd watched his savings dwindle, his friends drift away, his marriage crumble under the weight of his depression. By the time he'd found the strength to reach out for help, there was no one left to call, but the park had become his sanctuary, and in its quiet corners he'd found a different kind of peace. His journal was filled with sketches of the people who passed by: mothers pushing strollers, elderly couples walking hand in hand, children chasing squirrels across the grass. He knew their routines, their habits, the small dramas of their lives playing out against the backdrop of changing seasons. Mrs. Rodriguez would wave him in each morning for a cup of coffee and whatever day-old pastries hadn't sold. "Helping me clean up," she called it, preserving his dignity with the fiction of exchange. They rarely spoke much, but her cafe became his window to the world he'd left behind. He'd listen to the conversations around him, watch people tap away at their laptops, and sometimes sketch building designs on napkins that he'd later transfer to his journal. The regulars at the cafe had grown used to his presence. They didn't see him, not really. Their eyes slid past him like water over stone. But they'd accepted him as part of the landscape, like the ancient oak trees or the weathered benches. Only Mrs. Rodriguez's young granddaughter, Sophia, seemed to truly notice him. She'd peer over his shoulder while he sketched, asking questions about the buildings taking shape on the paper. "You draw pretty," she'd say, and for a moment he'd feel the weight of his past lift slightly. The journal had become his confidant, its pages filled with more than just sketches. He wrote about the life he'd lost, the mistakes he'd made, the dreams that still visited him in the quiet hours before dawn. Some days he'd write letters he'd never send, to his ex-wife, to former colleagues, to the son who'd stopped returning his calls years ago. The words were a way of keeping his mind sharp, of remembering who he was beneath the layers of loss and time. That particular morning had started like any other. He'd washed up, accepted his coffee from Mrs. Rodriguez, and settled onto his usual bench near the river. The spring air carried the promise of warmth, though the water still held winter's chill. He was working on a sketch of the city skyline, adding details from memory, when he heard the first splash. The latest issue of Forbes magazine lay on Clare Zhang's desk, her own image staring back at her from its glossy cover. Tech's New Queen, how Clare Zhang built a $50 billion empire, blazed across the photograph where she stood impeccably, dressed in a charcoal suit against the Manhattan skyline. She hadn't wanted to do the cover story, but her PR team had insisted it would help with the upcoming IPO of Zhang Innovation's newest subsidiary. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse office, casting long shadows across the awards and accolades that lined the walls. At 42, Claire had achieved more than most people dreamed possible, building a technology empire from the ground up. Yet success had come with its own peculiar form of solitude. She picked up the framed photo on her desk. Her late husband, James, and 7-year-old Timothy at the beach, both grinning widely. James had been gone 3 years now, taken by a sudden heart attack that no amount of money or influence could have prevented. The loss had changed everything, especially for Timothy. "Miss Zhang?" Her assistant's voice came through the intercom. Timothy's tutor called. "He's refused to participate in today's lessons again." Claire closed her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of guilt settle onto her shoulders. "Thank you, Andrea. I'll handle it." She glanced at her schedule. 3 board meetings, 2 investor calls, and a charity gala tonight. Somewhere in there, she needed to find time to be a mother. In the next room, Timothy sat surrounded by the latest educational toys and tablets, all designed to nurture his young mind, but his attention was fixed on the old stuffed dragon clutched in his arms, James's last gift to him. The tutor had long since left, leaving behind a note detailing Timothy's continued resistance to structured learning activities. "Hey, little dragon," Claire said softly, using James's old nickname for their son. Timothy didn't look up, his small fingers tracing the dragon's worn fabric. "I don't want another tutor," he mumbled. "I want to go to real school, like other kids." The words struck Claire like physical blows. After James's death, she'd withdrawn Timothy from his private school, convinced she could better protect him at home. The media attention, the potential security risks. It had all seemed too dangerous, but watching him now, she wondered if she'd been protecting him or imprisoning him. "How about we take a walk?" she suggested, an idea forming. "Just you and me in the park." Timothy's head snapped up, hope lighting his features. "Really? No security? Well, maybe just one," she began, but seeing his face fall, she made a decision that went against every careful protocol she'd established. No security, just us. The smile that broke across his face was worth every risk. They took the private elevator down to the garage, where Claire chose the least conspicuous of her cars, a modest SUV she rarely used. Timothy clutched his dragon as they drove, pointing out everything that caught his eye with an enthusiasm she hadn't seen in months. Riverside Park was only a few blocks from their building, but it felt like entering another world. Here, the carefully controlled environment of their penthouse gave way to the messy vitality of real life. Children played on the grass, couples walked hand in hand, and elderly men hunched over chess tables, contemplating their next moves. "Can we get closer to the water?" Timothy asked, tugging at her hand. Claire hesitated. She'd always been wary of the river's edge, but his pleading eyes wore down her resistance. "All right, but stay close to me." They walked along the riverside path, Timothy's dragon dancing through the air as he created elaborate stories about its adventures. Claire found herself relaxing, remembering similar walks with James. He'd always insisted on making time for moments like these, even when their company was just getting off the ground. "Miss Zhang!" A woman's voice interrupted her reverie. Claire turned to find Andrea hurrying toward them, tablet in hand. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but the board has called an emergency meeting. They're questioning the allocation of resources for the quantum computing division." Claire felt her professional mask slide back into place. "Timothy, honey, we need to—" She turned, but the spot where her son had been standing was empty. "Timothy!" Panic seized her throat as she scanned the crowded park. "Timothy!" And then she heard the splash. The stuffed dragon hit the water first. Timothy had been leaning over the railing, trying to make his beloved toy soar, just like in his imagination, when the worn fabric slipped from his fingers. Without a thought, he reached for it. One desperate grab that sent him tumbling over the barrier and into the river's cold embrace. Marcus heard the splash from his bench, his pencil freezing mid-stroke. Then came the scream, a mother's voice, raw with terror. "Timothy!" His body moved before. His mind could process the scene, muscle memory from long ago lifeguard training taking over. The precious journal fell from his lap as he ran, shrugging off his coat mid-stride. The boy had surfaced once, small hands flailing against the current before being pulled under again. Marcus could see the dragon floating nearby, its once cheerful face now a waterlogged beacon, marking where the child had gone down. Without hesitation, he dove into the frigid water. The cold hit him like a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs. Beneath the surface, the river was a murky chaos of swirling currents and debris. He forced his eyes open against the sting, searching for any sign of movement. There, a flash of red, the boy's jacket illuminated by filtered sunlight. Timothy was drifting limply in the current, his eyes closed, small bubbles escaping from his lips. Marcus kicked hard, fighting against the water's pull. His lungs burned for air, but he pushed through, stretching out his arms until his fingers brushed fabric. He grabbed hold and pulled the boy close, then kicked for the surface. They broke through into the air with a splash, Marcus gasping deeply while keeping Timothy's head above water. The current was still fighting them, trying to drag them back under, but Marcus had spent enough time watching the river to know its patterns. He angled their bodies diagonal to the flow, working with the water rather than against it as he made for the shore. A crowd had gathered along the riverbank. Clare Zhang stood at its edge, her professional composure shattered, mascara running down her cheeks as she watched the rescue unfold. Behind her, Andrea was already on the phone with emergency services, rattling off their location with practiced efficiency. Marcus's feet finally found purchase on the rocky bottom. He stood, water streaming from his clothes, cradling Timothy's limp form. The boy wasn't breathing. Laying him gently on the grass, Marcus checked for a pulse, finding one, but weak and thready. "He needs CPR," Marcus announced to no one in particular, his voice rough from river water. He tilted Timothy's head back, pinched his nose, and began rescue breathing. One breath, then another. Compressions next, careful to use only the force appropriate for a child. "Come on, little man," he muttered between compressions. "Your mother's waiting." The seconds stretched like hours. Claire had fallen to her knees beside them, one hand clutching Timothy's cold fingers, the other pressed against her mouth to hold back sobs. The crowd pressed closer, phones recording the scene, whispers building to a low roar. Then Timothy coughed, water spilling from his lips as his body convulsed. Marcus quickly turned him onto his side, supporting him as he expelled the river from his lungs. Each cough was followed by a desperate gasp for air, the sound like music to everyone's ears. "Mama!" Timothy's voice was barely a whisper. Claire gathered him into her arms, holding him close as tears flowed freely down her face. "I'm here, baby. I'm here." The wail of approaching sirens cut through the park's usual tranquility. Marcus stood shakily, his clothes heavy with river water, and began to step back from the scene. His work was done. The professionals would take over now, making sure the boy was properly cared for. "Wait!" Claire called out, but Marcus was already moving through the crowd. He retrieved his coat from where it had fallen, grateful that at least this precious gift had stayed dry. His journal, he noticed with a pang, had not been so fortunate. The pages were soaked through, years of sketches, and writings now bleeding into watercolor memories. As the paramedics arrived and the crowd's attention shifted, Marcus slipped away unnoticed, or so he thought. Mrs. Rodriguez stood in the doorway of her cafe, having witnessed everything. She watched him disappear down the path, then turned, her attention to the chaotic scene by the river. The CEO of Zhang Innovations, whose face she recognized from countless news reports, was climbing into an ambulance with her son. Mrs. Rodriguez looked down at the business card in her hand, one of many she'd collected from the reporters already swarming the scene. She tucked it carefully into her apron pocket, patting it once for good measure. Something told her it might come in handy very soon. Near the river's edge, bobbing gently in an eddy, Timothy's stuffed dragon continued its solitary journey downstream, a silent witness to the morning's miracle. The emergency room at Mount Sinai burst into controlled chaos as the ambulance arrived. Timothy, wrapped in thermal blankets, had remained conscious throughout the ride, his small hand never leaving his mother's grasp. Clare Zhang, still in. Her wet clothes from wading into the shallows followed the gurney through double doors, her usual commanding presence reduced to that of any worried mother. Hospital security footage would later show a curious series of moments. The CEO of Zhang Innovations pacing in a private waiting room, her designer suit water-stained and disheveled, nurses checking on the small boy in pediatric observation, and in the background, almost unnoticed, a tall figure in a wet army surplus coat briefly appearing at the emergency room entrance before vanishing again. Mrs. Zhang, the attending physician, approached with a clipboard. "Your son is going to be fine. No water in his lungs. Vital signs are good. We'd like to keep him overnight for observation, but he's asking for you." Claire nearly collapsed with relief. In Timothy's room, she found him propped up on pillows. His color returned to normal, but his first words broke her heart. Did anyone find Dragon? The stuffed toy, his last connection to James, was probably somewhere at the bottom of the river. Now. Before she could answer, Andrea appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand as always. "The media's caught wind of the story," she said softly. "They're already running headlines about the homeless hero who saved Timothy. We're getting requests for comments, and the board is concerned about—" "Find him." Claire's voice cut through Andrea's report like steel through silk. "I don't care what it takes. Find the man who saved my son." Security cameras had captured only grainy images of Marcus's departure. He'd left no name, no contact information, nothing but wet footprints that had long since dried on the hospital's linoleum floors. But Clare Zhang hadn't built an empire. By accepting defeat easily, she mobilized her company's resources with the same intensity she usually reserved for corporate acquisitions. Private investigators began canvassing the park and surrounding areas. Local shelters were contacted, rewards were offered. Yet Marcus Walsh seemed to have vanished as completely as Timothy's dragon. In his hidden corner of the park, Marcus huddled under a tarp as rain began to fall. His journal lay spread out nearby, its pages drying but irreparably damaged. Years of sketches and thoughts had blurred into abstract watercolors, like memories losing their sharp edges. He'd tried to save what he could, carefully separating the pages and laying them out to dry, but most were beyond recovery. The evening news played on a small radio given to him by one of the park's maintenance workers. He listened as reporters spun the morning's events into a human interest story, complete with speculation about his identity and whereabouts. The mysterious homeless man who saved billionaire Clare Zhang's son remains unidentified, the announcer said. Zhang Innovations has announced a substantial reward for information leading to his location. Marcus turned off the radio with a grimace. He'd learned long ago that attention rarely led to anything good. The last time his name had made the news, it had been accompanied by words like negligence and investigation. No, better to stay invisible, to let this moment pass like all the others. But as he drifted off to sleep that night, his dreams were filled with the memory of a small body growing still in his arms, and the desperate prayer that had accompanied each chest compression. Please, not another one. Not like my son. In her penthouse apartment, Claire sat beside Timothy's empty bed, holding the framed photo of him and James. She'd failed today, failed to protect her son, failed to thank the man who'd saved him. The thought of that stranger returning to the streets while she sat in luxury made her feel physically ill. "We'll find him, Timothy," she whispered to the sleeping boy in the hospital. "I promise." And Clare Zhang had never broken a promise to her son. Missing person flyers appeared throughout Riverside Park the next morning, featuring a grainy security camera image of a tall man in a military surplus coat. The reward amount listed below the photo would have been life-changing for most people, but the man in question never saw the flyers. Marcus had retreated to one of his backup sleeping spots, a hidden alcove behind an abandoned maintenance shed that he saved for times when he needed to be truly invisible. Clare Zhang's resources were formidable. Her private security team, usually focused on corporate espionage and executive protection, now found themselves combing through homeless shelter registries and soup kitchen logs. Facial recognition software analyzed years of traffic camera footage. Each dead end only strengthened her resolve. "Mrs. Zhang," Andrea appeared in her office doorway, tablet in hand as always. "The media coverage is intensifying. They're calling it the tale of two cities, the billionaire mother and the homeless hero. Social media is flooded with people claiming to have seen him, and our PR team is overwhelmed with interview requests." Claire barely looked up from the latest investigator's report. "What about the park staff interviews?" "Nothing concrete, but there's something interesting from the cafe owner near the accident site. And Mrs. Rodriguez, she's been reluctant to speak with our investigators, but she seems knowing." That caught Claire's attention. She'd been in enough negotiations to recognize when someone was holding valuable cards. "Cancel my afternoon meetings. I'm going to pay Mrs. Rodriguez a visit." The cafe was small, the kind of place Claire would have normally driven past without noticing. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and the handful of customers looked up, then quickly away, except for one elderly woman behind the counter who met her gaze steadily. "Mrs. Rodriguez?" Claire approached the counter, noting the woman's careful appraisal. "I'm Clare Zhang. I was hoping we could talk." "About Marcus?" Mrs. Rodriguez wiped her hands on her apron. "Sit. I'll make coffee." The name hit Claire like a physical force. Marcus. Finally, a real piece of the puzzle. She slid onto a worn vinyl stool as Mrs. Rodriguez prepared 2 cups of coffee with practiced movements. "He's been coming here for years," Mrs. Rodriguez continued, placing a steaming mug before Claire. "Every morning, same time. Quiet man, polite, helps me with the heavy lifting sometimes, though God knows he could use the food more than I could use the help. Do you know where I can find him?" Mrs. Rodriguez's expression softened. "He's a proud man, Mrs. Zhang. Life took everything from him, but he kept his dignity. That's worth something. I just want to thank him," Claire said quietly. "He saved my son's life. And now you want to save his?" Mrs. Rodriguez's tone was gentle but knowing. "Sometimes help isn't what people need most. Sometimes they need understanding first." Claire thought of Timothy, how he'd withdrawn after James's death, how all her attempts to help had only made him retreat further. "Tell me about him," she said finally. "Please." Mrs. Rodriguez studied her for a long moment, then reached beneath the counter and pulled out a leather-bound journal. its pages wrinkled and water-stained. "He left this behind when he pulled your boy from the river." She opened it carefully to reveal detailed architectural sketches, cityscapes, and written passages that spoke of both talent and education. "He was an architect," Mrs. Rodriguez continued. "Before, I don't know the whole story, but sometimes when he thinks no one is listening, he talks about the buildings he designed, about the family he lost, about mistakes he can't undo." Claire gently touched one of the sketches, a beautiful rendering of what appeared to be a children's hospital. The style seemed familiar somehow, but she couldn't quite place it. "If I tell you where to find him," Mrs. Rodriguez said, "you must promise me something. Promise me you'll remember that a man is more than his lowest moment, that sometimes the greatest act of kindness is letting someone help themselves." Claire looked up from the journal, meeting the older woman's eyes. "I promise." Mrs. Rodriguez nodded once, then took out a small notepad and began to write. Dawn was breaking over the park when Claire found him. Marcus sat on his usual bench, nursing a paper cup of Mrs. Rodriguez's coffee, watching early joggers pass by. He showed no surprise when Claire approached, as if he'd been expecting this moment all along. "May I?" Claire gestured to the empty space beside him. Marcus nodded slightly, his eyes remaining on the river. She sat, maintaining a careful distance, noting how he held himself with a dignity that transcended his worn clothes and rough appearance. "The boy?" His voice was quiet but clear. "He's all right?" "Yes." Claire's throat tightened with emotion. "Thanks to you. Timothy's been asking about you. He wants to thank you himself." A ghost of a smile touched Marcus's lips. "No thanks needed. Just glad I could help." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the sun paint the water in shades of gold. Claire found herself studying his profile, seeing beneath the beard and weathered features to the man he must have been before. There was something familiar about him that she couldn't quite place. "I found your journal," she said finally, reaching into her bag. "Mrs. Rodriguez gave it to me. Most of it's water damaged, but—" She held it out to him. Marcus took it carefully, his fingers tracing the warped leather cover. "Lot of memories in here. Some better left to fade, maybe." "The drawings are beautiful," Claire ventured. "Mrs. Rodriguez mentioned you were an architect in another life." His voice carried no self-pity, just quiet acceptance. A child's laugh drew their attention. A young boy was chasing pigeons near the water's edge, his mother hovering protectively nearby. Claire saw Marcus tense slightly, his eyes tracking the child's movement until he stepped away from the river. "Timothy lost his dragon," Claire said. Softly, the stuffed toy he was holding when he fell. It was the last gift his father gave him before. She stopped, surprised by how much the words still hurt. Marcus turned to look at her fully for the first time. "I'm sorry about your husband. James died 3 years ago. Heart attack, no warning, no goodbye, just gone." Claire hadn't meant to share so much, but something about Marcus's quiet presence made it feel natural. "Timothy withdrew after that. I thought I was protecting him by keeping him close. But instead I was trying to control the uncontrollable," Marcus finished. His eyes held understanding rather than judgment. "We do what we think is right at the time." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the gentle lapping of the river and the distant sounds of the city waking up. Claire found herself relaxing, reminded of early morning conversations with James when the world felt simpler. "I'd like to help you," she said finally, "not out of obligation, but because you're kind," Marcus interrupted gently. "But I'm not a project to be fixed, Mrs. Zhang." "Claire," she corrected. "And no, you're not a project. You're the man who saved my son's life, who draws buildings that should exist in the world, who hasn't lost his humanity despite everything life has thrown at him." Marcus looked down at his coffee cup, now empty. Mrs. Rodriguez appeared as if on cue, carrying a fresh pot and 2 clean cups. She filled them both without a word, her eyes twinkling with quiet approval before she withdrew. "Timothy would love to see you," Claire continued. "Even if, just for a few minutes, he has questions only you can answer. About the river, about Being brave about... She hesitated. About his dragon. Something shifted in Marcus's expression. Does he like buildings? He asked suddenly. Claire blinked at the unexpected question. He's fascinated by them, always asking how they stay up, why they look the way they do. Marcus opened his journal to one of the few pages that had survived. Relatively intact, it showed a whimsical design for a children's playground, where every element was both functional and storytelling. Slides emerging from dragons' mouths, swings hung from geometric trees, climbing walls disguised as castle towers. Maybe, he said slowly, I could show him how to draw something like this. Claire felt hope rise in her chest. He'd love that. The morning light grew stronger, the park filling with its regular rhythm of life. And on a bench by the river, two people from very different worlds found a moment of connection over a simple paper cup of coffee. The private room at Mrs. Rodriguez's cafe had become their meeting place over the next few days. It was there, over cups of strong coffee and fresh pastries, that Claire laid out her proposition. She'd placed her business card on the table between them, not the standard corporate one with just her title and contact information, but her personal card with her private number handwritten on the back. I have a proposal for you, Marcus, she began, her voice carrying the same careful tone she used in delicate negotiations. Zhang Innovations is launching a new charitable foundation focusing on sustainable urban development and affordable housing. We need someone who understands both the architectural and human elements of the project. Marcus sat quietly, his weathered hands wrapped around his coffee cup. Through the small window, they could see reporters still lingering outside the cafe, held at bay by Mrs. Rodriguez's fierce protectiveness of her establishment. You've seen my record, he said finally. It wasn't a question. Of course she had. Someone with her resources would have discovered everything by now. Yes, Claire met his gaze steadily. The Hamilton project, the lawsuit, the professional censure. I've read it all. Marcus's face tightened almost imperceptibly. Then you know why I can't. I know that 6 years ago, a design flaw was discovered. In a low-income housing project you architected, Claire interrupted gently. I know that rather than fight the lawsuit, you accepted full responsibility, surrendered your license, and gave up everything you had to ensure the residents were safely rehoused. She pulled out a folder and opened it, revealing newspaper clippings and court documents. What the headlines didn't show was that the flaw originated in materials that had been fraudulently certified by the suppliers. Materials you had every reason to trust were safe. Marcus stared at the documents, his expression unreadable. How did you... I have good investigators, Claire said simply, and I recognize integrity when I see it. You could have fought, could have shifted blame, could have hidden behind corporate lawyers. Instead, you sacrificed everything to protect people you'd never met. Through the window, they watched as Mrs. Rodriguez shooed away another persistent reporter, her small frame somehow making her look more formidable rather than less. In the main cafe, Timothy sat at a table with Sophia, Mrs. Rodriguez's granddaughter. Both children bent over a piece of paper as Timothy tried to copy one of Marcus's building sketches. The foundation needs someone who understands that buildings are more than just structures, Claire continued. They're homes, communities, safe spaces for people to build their lives. Someone who's seen both sides of the equation. She pulled out another document, a contract printed on heavy paper. Full creative control of the foundation's projects. A chance to make a real difference, this time with proper resources and support behind you. And she hesitated, then pushed forward. A chance to reinstate your architectural license. My lawyers have already begun the process. Marcus's hand trembled slightly as he reached for the contract. Why? He asked quietly. Why go to all this trouble for a stranger? Claire glanced at Timothy, who was now proudly showing his drawing to Mrs. Rodriguez. Because when my son was drowning, you didn't see a billionaire's child or a PR opportunity. You just saw a kid who needed help. Because every sketch in your journal shows the same care for the people who would live in those buildings. and because sometimes life gives us a chance to right old wrongs. She reached into her bag one last time and pulled out a small, familiar object, a stuffed dragon, somewhat worse for wear but carefully cleaned and repaired. The river patrol found him caught in some branches downstream. I thought maybe you could give him back to Timothy yourself. Marcus stared at the dragon, then at the contract, then at Clare. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and uncertainty. Finally, he reached for his coffee cup, took one last sip, and set it down with quiet determination. "There are conditions," he said. "The Foundation's first project needs to be affordable housing. Real affordable housing, not just tax credit showcase pieces. And Mrs. Rodriguez gets to open a cafe in whatever building we design first." Claire felt a smile spread across her face. "I think we can arrange that." She pulled out a pen and held it out to him. "Partners!" Marcus looked at the pen, then at Timothy, then back at Claire. In that moment, he saw not just an offer of redemption, but a chance to build something meaningful again. Slowly, he reached for the pen. Outside, the morning sun caught the river's surface, making it sparkle like new possibilities. The old architecture award sat in a cardboard box at the back of Claire's private storage facility, along with other artifacts from a time she rarely allowed herself to remember. "Excellence in Humanitarian Design," the inscription read. "Presented to Marcus Walsh and James Zhang for the Children's Hope Medical Center." Claire's hands trembled as she held the award, memories flooding back. James had spoken often of his early career, of the brilliant young architect who'd helped him design his first major project. But she'd never made the connection until now, when a deeper investigation into Marcus's past had revealed this shared history. In his temporary office at Zhang Innovations, a sparse room he'd insisted on rather than the executive suite Claire had offered, Marcus was reviewing old blueprints. When she entered, he looked different now, his beard trimmed, wearing clean clothes that Mrs. Rodriguez had helped him select. But his eyes still carried the same quiet dignity she'd first noticed on the park bench. "You worked with James," she said softly, placing the award on his desk. 15 years ago, the Children's Hope Project." Marcus stared at the award for a long moment, his fingers ghosting over the engraved names. "I wondered when you'd find out," he said finally. "James Zhang. I didn't make the connection at first. There are many Zhangs in architecture. Then I saw his photo in your office. Why didn't you say anything?" What was there to say? Marcus's voice held no bitterness, only a deep sadness. "That I once worked with your late husband? That we created something beautiful together before life took us in different directions? Some memories are better left undisturbed." Claire sank into the chair across from him. "Tell me about him. About how you knew him." Marcus's eyes grew distant, seeing a younger James Zhang in his mind's eye, fresh out of business school, full of ideas about combining profitable development with social responsibility. Everyone said he was naive, that you couldn't make money and make a difference at the same time. But he had this conviction, this belief that good design could change lives. The Children's Hope Center was his dream project, Claire said softly. "He talked about it until the day he died. We spent months on the design," Marcus continued, "making every detail perfect. The way the sunlight would fall in the recovery rooms, the gardens where children could feel like they were playing instead of healing, the parents' spaces that felt like homes instead of waiting rooms." He smiled faintly. "James used to say that hope needs good architecture." "What happened?" Claire asked, though she already knew parts of the story. "After the project?" Marcus's face clouded. "Different opportunities, different paths. James went on to create Zhang Innovations, started focusing on larger commercial projects. I stayed with humanitarian design, trying to prove that good architecture shouldn't be just for those who could afford it." His hand strayed to the Hamilton project documents on his desk. "Until I proved the opposite." "James never lost that initial vision," Claire said. "He was planning to return to it, to create a foundation much like the one we're building now." He just ran out of time. They sat in silence for a moment, both lost in thoughts of the man they'd known in different ways. Outside the office window, they could see Timothy in the building's daycare center, carefully explaining one of Marcus's architectural sketches to his young friends. "He has James's smile," Marcus observed, "the same way of lighting up when he's excited about something." Claire felt tears prick at her eyes. Yes, he does. "The Hamilton Project," Marcus said suddenly, pulling out the blueprints he'd been reviewing. "The flaw wasn't just in the materials. I've been going over it again, and there was something else. Something I missed back then, because I was too focused on the structural elements." He spread the drawings out, pointing to specific details. "The supplier fraud was real, but there was also a design assumption I made about how the space would be used, about what the community needed. I was so focused on providing shelter that I forgot about creating home." Claire leaned forward, studying the plans. "And now I understand both sides better," Marcus said quietly. "What it means to need not just a roof, but a place to belong. What it means to lose everything and have to rebuild." He looked up at Claire. "What it means to be given a second chance." The late afternoon sun slanted through the window, casting long shadows across the blueprints. In the daycare center, Timothy had fallen asleep clutching his restored dragon, his face peaceful in a way Claire hadn't seen since James's death. "Second chances," she murmured. "Maybe that's what all of us need." The keys to Marcus's new apartment felt foreign in his hand, heavy with both possibility and responsibility. The modest one-bedroom unit was nothing like the luxurious penthouse Clare had initially offered. Instead, it was a simple space in one of Zhang Innovation's recently renovated buildings, close enough to the park that he could still visit Mrs. Rodriguez's cafe each morning. "Home, sweet home," he muttered to himself, standing in the empty living room. A few basic furnishings had been delivered, a bed, a table, some chairs, but the walls remained bare, waiting for the architectural sketches he'd begun drawing. Again, his phone buzzed, another new addition to his life. A text from Claire. "Board meeting running late. Timothy asks if you're still coming to dinner." Before he could reply, another message appeared. "Urgent. Turn on the news." Marcus found the remote for the small television that came with the apartment. As the screen flickered to life, his blood ran cold. There, splashed across the screen, was a headline he'd hoped never to see again. "Zhang Innovation Scandal. CEO's homeless hero connected to James Zhang's death." The reporter's voice filled the room. "Sources close to Zhang Innovations have revealed shocking connections between Marcus Walsh, the homeless man who recently saved Clare Zhang's son, and the suspicious circumstances surrounding James Zhang's death 3 years ago. Documents suggest Walsh was the last person to meet with James Zhang before his fatal heart attack." Marcus's hands shook as he reached for his phone, but it was already ringing. Claire's name flashed on the screen. "Don't move." Her voice was tight with tension. "Security is on their way. The press somehow got hold of—" "Claire," he interrupted, "I can explain. You'd better." The line went dead. Within minutes, the building's lobby was swarming with reporters. Marcus watched. From his window, as security personnel struggled to keep them at bay. His phone buzzed continuously with messages from unknown numbers. Journalists, no doubt, hungry for the story. A private elevator opened directly into his apartment, and Clare Zhang stepped out, her face a mask of controlled emotion. She held a manila folder in her hands, one he recognized immediately. "Is it true?" she asked without preamble. "Were you there the day James died?" Marcus sank into a chair, the weight of long-buried memories pressing down on him. "Yes." Claire's composure cracked slightly. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I've spent 3 years trying to forget that day," Marcus said quietly, "trying to forget that I might have been able to prevent it." He reached for the folder in Claire's hands. Inside were security camera stills from the day James died. Images showing Marcus, then still wearing a suit and tie, entering James's office. The timestamp showed it was just hours before James's fatal heart attack. "James called me that day," Marcus began, his voice heavy with memory. "Said he'd discovered something about the Hamilton project, about why the materials had failed. He had evidence that could have cleared my name, proved the supplier fraud went deeper than anyone suspected. But when I arrived at his office, he was already feeling unwell," Claire finished, her voice barely a whisper. "The security logs show you left after only 10 minutes. He insisted he was fine, just heartburn, said he'd call me the next day about the evidence." Marcus's eyes filled with tears. "I should have stayed, should have called an ambulance, should have—" "Stop." Claire's voice was sharp. "James had a congenital heart condition he'd hidden for years. The doctor said nothing could have prevented what happened. But if I'd gotten him help sooner, then I'd have lost him an hour later instead of 3. Claire's hands were trembling. "Now, the press is spinning this, like you were somehow responsible, like there's some conspiracy. They're saying I hired you out of guilt, that the whole rescue was staged." A small voice from the doorway stopped them both. "Mom!" Timothy stood there, clutching his dragon, eyes wide with confusion. Behind him, Andrea hovered anxiously. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Zhang," Andrea said quickly. "He insisted on coming with me when—" "I brought the files you requested." Claire moved to shield Timothy from Marcus, but the boy darted past her. He ran straight to Marcus, climbing into his lap with the unquestioning trust of a child. "Are you going away?" Timothy asked, his voice small. "The people on TV said bad things, and last time people said bad things, Daddy went away and didn't come back." Marcus looked helplessly at Claire, whose face showed the same war of emotions he felt: anger, fear, uncertainty, and underneath it all, a desperate desire to protect this child from more loss. "Timothy," Claire said gently, "Marcus and I need to talk about some grown-up things. Why don't you—" "No!" Timothy clutched Marcus's shirt. "You can't make him go away. He draws buildings with me, and he saved Dragon, and he makes you smile like Daddy did, and—" "Timothy!" Marcus's voice was soft but firm. "Sometimes grown-ups need to sort out complicated things. But I promise you, no matter what happens, I will always be your friend." Claire watched them together, her mind racing. The media storm would only grow worse. The board was already demanding answers. Everything she'd built, personally and professionally, was at risk. But watching her son cling to Marcus, seeing the gentle way he held Timothy, she remembered James's favorite saying, "The truth has a way of building its own foundation." "Andrea," she said suddenly, "get me everything we have on the Hamilton project suppliers. Every document, every email, every financial record, and call Mrs. Rodriguez. We're going to need her cafe for a few hours." She turned to Marcus and Timothy. "We're not running from this. We're going to find out what James discovered that day, all of us, together." The viral video surfaced 3 days after the news broke. Shaky smartphone footage from 6 years ago showed Marcus Walsh being escorted from his architecture firm, box of belongings in hand, while protesters from the Hamilton project held signs denouncing him. The clip had gained millions of views overnight, accompanied by cruel commentaries and wild speculation about his connection to James Zhang's death. Mrs. Rodriguez's cafe had become their sanctuary, the only place where they could meet without cameras following their every move. She kept the blinds drawn and turned away reporters with a fierceness that had earned her the nickname The Guardian among the regular customers who remained loyal. "Look at this," Andrea said, sliding her tablet across the table. The screen showed a financial news site's homepage. "Zhang Innovation stock drops 15% amid leadership concerns." Below it, a photo of Claire and Marcus at the park, taken with a long-lens camera, carried the caption, "Too close for comfort?" Claire barely glanced at it. She was focused on a stack of old files from the Hamilton project, searching for the evidence James had mentioned to Marcus that final day. Timothy sat nearby, unusually quiet, drawing buildings with less enthusiasm than usual. The boards called, An emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. Andrea continued softly. They're concerned about appearances. Appearances? Marcus looked up from his own set of documents. You mean they're concerned about me? They're concerned about everything, Claire said, her voice tight with frustration. The stock price, the foundation launch, the media speculation. Some of them are even suggesting... She stopped, glancing at Timothy. But Timothy wasn't as absorbed in his drawing as they thought. They want Marcus to go away, he said quietly. Like the mean people made Daddy go away. The adults exchanged worried looks. Timothy had been having nightmares again, mixing memories of James's death with fears about Marcus leaving. Claire had found him sleeping with his dragon clutched tight every night, something he hadn't done since the first year after losing his father. Nobody's going anywhere, sweetheart, Claire assured him, but her voice lacked conviction. Marcus pushed back his chair and walked to Timothy's table, kneeling beside him. What are you drawing? Timothy sniffled slightly. It's the happy building, where everybody can live together and nobody has to leave. Marcus studied the child's drawing. A tall structure with countless windows, each one filled with smiling faces. At the top, 3 figures stood together, a woman in business clothes, a man in what looked like his old army coat, and a small boy holding a dragon. That's a beautiful design, Marcus said softly. You know, sometimes when things seem scary or sad, architects like us, we put our feelings into our buildings. We make spaces where people can feel safe and loved, like Daddy's hospital for sick kids. Exactly like that. Marcus glanced at Claire, who was watching them with tears in her eyes. Your daddy understood that buildings aren't just walls and windows. They're homes for hopes and dreams. Mrs. Rodriguez appeared with fresh coffee and her signature empanadas. The vultures are circling again, she reported, referring to the reporters outside. But Miguel and his friends from the community center are keeping them at bay. The community center, another of James's projects, had rallied behind them. The residents remembered how James and Marcus had fought to include affordable housing units in the development against the board's wishes. Now, those same residents formed a human barrier against intrusive journalists, protecting the cafe that had become a second home to so many. We should go public, Marcus said suddenly. Tell the whole story, not just the pieces they're twisting. Claire shook her head. The board would never... The board isn't who we need to convince, Marcus interrupted. He pulled out his journal, the old water-damaged one, and opened it to a page where the ink had run but the words were still legible. James wrote something here the day before he died. A note about the Hamilton project. Sometimes the strongest foundations are built on exposed truths. Timothy looked up from his drawing. Is that like in my building, where everybody can see everybody else and nobody has to hide? Out of the mouths of babes, Claire thought. She reached for her phone and dialed Andrea's number. Cancel tomorrow's board meeting, she said firmly. Instead, schedule a press conference. It's time everyone learned the truth about James Zhang's last discovery. The Zhang Innovations boardroom had always felt like a gladiatorial arena to Claire, but never more so than today. 12 faces regarded her with varying degrees of concern and disapproval as Andrea distributed copies of the latest board meeting. Minutes, each page marked with glaring red confidential stamps. The numbers speak for themselves. Harrison Wells, the lead director, gestured to the financial projections displayed on the wall. Our stock has dropped 20%. 3 major investors have pulled out. The foundation launch is in shambles. He fixed Claire with a stern look. And now you want to hold a press conference. James would have wanted, Claire began. James is dead, Harrison cut in, then softened his tone at the collective intake of breath around the table. I'm sorry, Claire, but we need to think about the company's future. Your personal feelings about this homeless man. His name is Marcus Walsh. Claire's voice could have frozen fire, and he was James's friend. He was a disgraced architect who happened to be the last person to see your husband alive, another board member interjected. Now he's saved your son. Conveniently dramatic timing, wouldn't you say? Claire's hands clenched under the table. "Are you suggesting the rescue was staged? We're suggesting that your judgment may be compromised," Harrison said carefully. "Emotionally compromised. The board has drafted a resolution to remove me as CEO." Claire's calm words silenced the room. "That's what this is really about, isn't it?" Andrea, standing quietly in the corner, gave an almost imperceptible nod. She'd discovered the draft resolution in the company's legal files late last night. "We're proposing a temporary step back," Harrison explained smoothly. "Just until this situation resolves itself. Think about Timothy, about his future, about his safety, with all this media attention." The mention of her son's name was calculated, and Claire felt it like a physical blow. Timothy had barely slept last night, worried about the whispered phone calls and late meetings. He'd asked this morning if they would have to move away, like they had after James died. "The foundation project will be suspended," Harrison continued. "Mr. Walsh's contract will be terminated, with generous compensation, of course. The press will move on to another story, and in 6 months—" "No." Claire's voice was quiet but firm. "James didn't build this company by running from hard truths. Neither will I." She stood, smoothing her skirt with steady hands. "I'm calling an emergency shareholder meeting tomorrow morning." The board erupted in protests, but Claire continued. "In the meantime, I suggest you all review the original Hamilton project files, particularly the supplier records James was investigating before he died." She smiled thinly. "Some of your names appear quite prominently." The color drained from Harrison's face. "You can't prove—" "James could. That's what he discovered, isn't it? That board members were involved in the supplier fraud. That's why he called Marcus that day, not just to clear his name, but to expose the real corruption." Claire walked to the door, then turned back. "Oh, and Harrison, I wouldn't bother trying to access those offshore accounts you set up 6 years ago. They've been frozen pending investigation." The boardroom exploded into chaos as she left, Andrea close behind. In the elevator, Claire finally allowed her hands to shake. "Send copies of everything to the SEC," she instructed Andrea, "and call Marcus. Tell him—" The elevator doors opened to reveal Marcus himself, standing in the lobby with Timothy. One look at their faces told her something was wrong. "They came to the school," Marcus said quietly. "Reporters, asking Timothy questions about James." Timothy pressed himself against Marcus's side, clutching his dragon. "They said Marcus killed Daddy," he whispered. "They said he was bad, and that's why he was homeless and—" Claire gathered her son in her arms, meeting Marcus's anguished eyes. Over Timothy's head, she saw in them the same pain she felt, the same fierce protectiveness, and something else, a decision forming. "I should go," Marcus said softly, "until this blows over. It's not fair to either of you." "No!" Timothy's cry echoed through the lobby. You promised you wouldn't leave." Claire reached out and caught Marcus's hand before he could step away. "We face this together," she said firmly. "All of us. James would have wanted that." For a moment they stood there, the billionaire CEO, the homeless architect, and the little boy who had brought them together, while outside reporters gathered like storm clouds on the horizon. The old newspaper article lay between them on Mrs. Rodriguez's table, its yellowed edges curling in the steam from their untouched coffee cups. "Local architect takes fall for Hamilton project failure," the headline declared, but it was the smaller article beside it that had captured their attention. Zhang Innovations board member linked to construction supply company. "James found this," Claire said softly, touching the paper. "This is what he wanted to tell you that day." Marcus nodded, his eyes fixed on the article. "Harrison Wells. He owned shell companies that supplied the defective materials, not just for Hamilton, but for dozens of projects across the city. The cafe was closed, its windows darkened against the press gathered outside. Mrs. Rodriguez had let them in through the back door, then stationed herself as lookout, armed with her rolling pin and fierce determination to protect their privacy. But why didn't James come forward immediately? Claire wondered. Why wait? Because of this. Marcus pulled out a worn envelope from his coat pocket. I found it last night, hidden in the lining of my old briefcase. James must have slipped it there during our last meeting. Inside was a single USB drive and a handwritten note. Marcus, if anything happens to me, give this to Claire. The truth has a way of building its own foundation. Claire's hands trembled as she plugged the drive into her laptop. Files filled. The screen, emails, bank statements, coded messages between board members. A conspiracy spanning years, with Harrison Wells at its center. They knew the materials were defective, Marcus said quietly. They knew, and they used them anyway. Cheaper to pay off inspectors than buy quality supplies. When things went wrong at Hamilton, they needed a scapegoat, Claire finished. And you were perfect, the idealistic architect who insisted on affordable housing, who pushed back against cost-cutting measures. James figured it out too late, Marcus continued. By then, I'd already accepted responsibility, surrendered my license. He tried to tell me that day in his office, but he never got the chance. Claire's voice broke slightly. And you've carried that guilt all these years thinking you could have saved him. Timothy, who had been quietly drawing nearby, looked up. Is that why you saved me? He asked Marcus. Because you couldn't save Daddy? The simple question struck them both silent. Marcus moved to kneel beside Timothy's chair, choosing his words carefully. I saved you because you needed help, he said gently. Just like your daddy tried to help me. He was a good man who believed in doing what was right, no matter how hard it might be. Like when he built the hospital for sick kids, Timothy asked. Even when the mean people said he shouldn't? Claire caught her breath. The Children's Hope Medical Center, James and Marcus's first project together. The board had opposed it, arguing it wasn't profitable enough. But James had insisted, setting the pattern for his entire career. Exactly like that, Marcus smiled. Your daddy taught me that buildings aren't just about making money. They're about making life better for people who need help. Claire studied the two of them together, her son and the man who had saved him, bound together by more than just that moment at the river. In Marcus's gentle wisdom and unwavering integrity, she saw echoes of James that made her heart ache with recognition. We have to make this right, she said firmly. Not just for James or for you, Marcus, but for every family that lived in buildings made with those defective materials. For every project that was compromised by their greed. The press conference, Marcus nodded, but Wells and the board, they'll fight back hard. Let them, Claire's voice held steel. James left us the foundation of truth. Now it's time to build something lasting on it. Timothy held up his drawing, a sketch of the Children's Hope Medical Center drawn from the photo in Claire's office. Can we make more buildings like this? He asked. Buildings that help people? Marcus and Claire exchanged looks over Timothy's head, seeing in each other the same determination, the same hope that had brought James and Marcus together all those years ago. Outside, the first rays of dawn began to paint the sky, while inside the cafe, three people bound by loss and love began to plan how to rebuild not just a company, but a legacy. Marcus's resignation letter sat unsigned on Claire's desk, its crisp white paper stark against the mahogany surface. I hereby tender my resignation. Effective immediately. The formal words felt like a betrayal of everything they'd built over the past weeks. You can't seriously be considering this, Claire said, pacing her office. The morning news played silently on the wall screen, showing footage of protesters outside Zhang Innovation's headquarters. Some held signs supporting Claire and Marcus. Others demanded their removal. Look at what this is doing to the company, to Timothy. Marcus gestured to the scene below. Harrison called me this morning, offered a deal. I leave quietly, take the blame for everything, and they'll ensure you keep your position as CEO. And bury James's evidence forever. Claire's voice was bitter. Let them get away with it all. Timothy had another nightmare last night, Marcus said quietly. Mrs. Rodriguez told me he was crying at the cafe this morning, afraid that both of us would disappear like James did. Before Claire could respond, Andrea burst into the office, her usual composure shattered. "Mrs. Zhang, Timothy's gone." "What?" Claire felt her world tilt. He was at the daycare center, then the protesters started chanting outside, and in the confusion, Andrea's voice broke. "Security's reviewing the cameras now." Marcus was already moving, grabbing his coat. "The river," he said. "He goes there when he's upset. It's where he feels close to—" "James," Claire finished. They shared a look of understanding before rushing to the elevator. The spring morning had turned cold, a light rain falling over the city. As they ran through the park, Claire's designer heels sinking into the mud, memories of another desperate morning by the river flooded back. They found Timothy exactly where Marcus had predicted, sitting on their usual bench, soaked to the skin, clutching his dragon. But he wasn't alone. Harrison Wells sat beside him, an umbrella held over them both. "Timothy!" Claire's relief turned to ice as she saw Harrison's smile. "Such a brave boy," Harrison said smoothly, "coming to his special place. He's been telling me all about the buildings he draws with Marcus, about his daddy's hospital, about the evidence you found." Marcus took a step forward, but Harrison raised a hand. "Careful now. We wouldn't want any accidents. By the river, not again." "You knew," Marcus said, realization dawning. "You knew James was investigating you. That's why you were watching his office that day. Why you didn't call for help when he had his unfortunate heart attack? Tragic, really." Harrison's voice hardened. "Just as tragic as it would be if young Timothy here grew up without a mother. If Claire lost her company, her reputation, everything she and James built. Let him go." Claire's voice shook with fury. "Oh, I will. Once Marcus signs that resignation letter, taking full responsibility for both the Hamilton project and poor James's death. Once you agree to drop this foolish investigation and announce your full support for the board's leadership." Timothy looked between them, his small face confused and frightened. "Marcus," he whispered, "you promised you wouldn't." "Leave." The rain fell harder, drumming against Harrison's umbrella. Marcus took another step forward, then another, until he stood directly in front of Harrison. "You're right about one thing," he said quietly. "I am responsible. Responsible for staying silent too long, for letting fear keep me from fighting. For the truth." He knelt before Timothy, meeting his eyes. "But I made a promise, and this time I'm keeping it." In one fluid motion, Marcus scooped Timothy into his arms and stepped back. Claire rushed forward to take her son, as Harrison rose in fury. "You're making a mistake," he snarled. "All of you!" "No," came a voice from behind them. Mrs. Rodriguez stood there, phone held high, its camera recording everything. Behind her, a crowd had gathered. Cafe regulars, community center residents, reporters with their own cameras rolling. "The only mistake was thinking you could threaten a child in my park." Harrison's face drained of color as he realized every word. Every threat had been captured. In the distance, police sirens wailed. Timothy buried his face in Claire's shoulder, then turned to reach one hand toward Marcus. "Don't go," he pleaded. Marcus took the small hand in his, then reached for Claire's free hand. Together, they stood, in the rain, forming a circle of protection around their boy. "Never," Marcus promised. "We face this together." The Zhang Innovations Auditorium had never been so full. Shareholders, reporters, and employees packed every seat, while a live stream carried the event to millions worldwide. The press conference announcement had sent the company's stock into freefall. But Claire stood calmly at the podium, Marcus and Timothy beside her, Mrs. Rodriguez and her community supporters filling the front rows. "My husband, James Zhang, built this company on a simple principle," Claire began, her voice steady. "That profit and purpose could coexist, that buildings could serve both their investors and their communities." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the board, members seated uncomfortably in the front row. "Today, we honor that vision by telling the truth, all of it. The presentation screen behind her filled with documents from James's USB drive. Email chains, bank transfers, shell company records. The evidence was devastating and undeniable. In the audience, several board members quietly tried to leave, only to find police officers waiting at the exits. The Hamilton project wasn't a failure of architecture, Clare continued. It was a failure of integrity. A conspiracy of greed that cost lives, destroyed reputations, and betrayed everything this company stands for. Marcus stepped forward. Then, his quiet dignity commanding attention. I accepted blame because I believed I had failed the families who trusted me to build them a safe home. Today, I accept a different responsibility, to help rebuild not just buildings, but trust. Timothy, clutching his dragon, smiled up at them both. The sight of the little boy, standing brave between the two adults who had fought to protect him, sent a ripple of murmurs through the crowd. Zhang Innovations is announcing 3 initiatives, effective immediately, Clare's voice rang out. First, a full investigation in partnership with the SEC, identifying every project that used compromised materials. Second, a $1 billion commitment to repair or rebuild every affected structure. She paused, allowing the gasps and whispers to subside. And third, the establishment of the James Zhang Foundation for Ethical Architecture, with Marcus Walsh as its director. The screen changed to show preliminary designs, not just for new buildings, but for a new vision of urban development. Safe, sustainable, accessible communities that brought people together instead of pricing them out. My daddy built hospitals for sick kids, Timothy suddenly said into the microphone, his clear voice silencing the room. And Marcus saves people. They're both my heroes. Clare felt tears prick her eyes as a wave of emotions swept through the auditorium. In the back, Mrs. Rodriguez was openly crying, while her cafe regulars and community center residents stood and began to applaud. To the shareholders concerned about profits, Clare continued over the growing applause, I remind you that James's ethical approach built this company's value. To those worried about reputation, I say there is no stronger foundation than truth. And to anyone who thinks we can't change how business is done in this city, she smiled. Watch us. The applause grew thunderous. Social media exploded with clips of Timothy's words and Marcus's quiet strength. Zhang Innovations stock, which had been falling all morning, suddenly began to rise. In the front row, Andrea signaled Clare. The SEC had just announced formal charges against Harrison Wells and 6 other board members. The conspiracy was unraveling, just as James had intended. One last thing, Clare said as the applause finally quieted. The first project of the James Zhang Foundation will be a complete reimagining of Riverside Park and its surrounding community. Not to replace what's there, but to enhance it. To create spaces where people from all walks of life can come together, where children can play safely, where... She glanced at Mrs. Rodriguez. Local businesses can thrive. She reached for Marcus's hand, feeling Timothy slip his small fingers into her other hand. James used to say that the true measure of a building isn't its height or cost, but the lives it touches. Today, we begin building something that can't be measured in floors or dollars, a legacy of truth, justice, and community that will stand longer than any skyscraper. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just for her words. It was for the sight of them together, the CEO, the architect, and the little boy whose near tragedy had set truth free, for the promise of a new way of doing business, for the power of second chances and the strength of promises kept. And in the back of the auditorium, those who knew where to look might have sworn they saw James Zhang smile in the morning sunlight streaming through the windows, blessing the new foundation, being built on his legacy of love. 1 year later, the blueprint spread across Marcus's desk told a story of transformation. The new Riverside Community Center rose from the page in sweeping lines and thoughtful details, a building that seemed to grow from the park itself, with gardens climbing its walls and spaces that flowed seamlessly from inside to out. "The council approved the final plans this morning," he told Clare as she entered his office. No longer the sparse, temporary space, but a warm room filled with drawings and models. Timothy's architectural sketches held places of honor on the walls, showing his progression from childish scribbles to increasingly sophisticated designs. Claire smiled, setting down 2 cups of coffee from Mrs. Rodriguez's cafe, now a thriving establishment with 3 locations, all in Zhang innovations. Buildings. She's already planning the menu for the rooftop cafe. Of course she is. Marcus's eyes crinkled with affection. "Did you see the community center residents this morning? They're organizing a celebration for the groundbreaking. The past year had brought changes none of them could have imagined. The SEC investigation had led to multiple convictions, including Harrison Wells. Zhang Innovations had emerged stronger, its new ethical framework attracting investors who shared James's vision of responsible development. But the real transformation had been personal. "Timothy's teacher called," Claire said, settling into what had become her favorite chair in Marcus's office. "He won the school science fair with his sustainable building design. James would have been so proud." Marcus's voice was soft with emotion. "He is proud," Claire replied, touching the framed photo on Marcus's desk. James and Marcus at the opening of the Children's Hope Medical Center, both young and full of dreams. Next to it stood a newer photo, Marcus, Claire, and Timothy. At the launch of the James Zhang Foundation, their faces alight with shared purpose. A knock at the door interrupted them. Timothy burst in, followed by Mrs. Rodriguez's granddaughter Sophia, both carrying rolled-up drawings. "Look what we designed." Timothy spread his paper across Marcus's blueprint. "It's a playground for the community center, with special spaces for kids who use wheelchairs, and quiet areas for kids who need them. And a dragon slide," Sophia added enthusiastically. "Like Timothy's dragon, but huge." Marcus studied their design with serious attention, pointing out clever details and suggesting gentle improvements. Claire watched them, her heart full. The frightened boy who had lost his father had blossomed into a confident child with not just one parent, but a whole community of love around him. "We should show this to the development team," Marcus said, making both children beam with pride. "Maybe incorporate some of these ideas into the final design." "Really?" Timothy's eyes widened. "Like a real architect?" "Like a real architect," Marcus confirmed. "You know, your daddy always said the best designs come from understanding what people really need. I'd say you two understand exactly what kids in this community need." Claire's phone buzzed. A news alert. The headline made her catch her breath. Zhang Innovations named Most Ethical Corporation of the Year. Below was a photo of the 3 of them at the recent shareholders' meeting, Timothy proudly holding up a model of their latest affordable housing project. "Marcus," she said softly, showing him the phone. "We did it. We really did it." He took her hand, his eyes saying everything words couldn't. They had done more than clear his name or save her company. They had built something James had only dreamed of, a way of doing business that truly served the community. "Can we go show Mrs. Rodriguez our design?" Timothy asked, carefully rolling up his drawing. "She said she'd make special dragon cookies." "Today, of course," Claire laughed. "But first," she pulled out an envelope she'd been saving. "The adoption papers came through this morning. If you still want to make it official." Marcus's voice was thick with emotion. "To be a real family?" Timothy launched himself into Marcus's arms, then reached for Claire, pulling them both into a tight hug. His dragon, ever present, squished between them. "We already are a real family," Timothy declared with a child's simple wisdom. "Now everybody else will just know it too." Through the office window, the sun painted the river in shades of gold, while in the park below, the foundation was being laid for a new building and a new beginning. The grand opening of Riverside Community Center coincided with Timothy's 9th birthday. A photograph captured the moment perfectly. Marcus and Claire cutting the ribbon together, Timothy between them, holding his ever-present dragon, and Mrs. Rodriguez beaming proudly from her new rooftop cafe. Behind them, the building rose like a living thing, its green walls and community gardens already blooming in the spring sunshine. "One more story, Papa?" Timothy asked later that evening. Sitting in their favorite spot by the river, the old bench had been preserved in the park's renovation, now surrounded by a children's reading garden where parents and children gathered daily to share books and dreams. Marcus smiled, exchanging a glance with Claire. "Which one would you like? The one about the architect and the dragon?" "No," Timothy grinned. "Tell me again about how you and Mom fell in love while building hope." Claire reached for Marcus's hand as he began the familiar tale, one that had become part of the community's folklore. Children played on the dragon-shaped slide nearby, their laughter mixing with the river's gentle flow. Through the cafe windows, they could see Mrs. Rodriguez teaching Sophia how to make her famous empanadas, preparing her to carry on the family tradition. The James Zhang Foundation had transformed more than just the park. Its principles of ethical architecture and community involvement had spread across the city, inspiring other companies to follow suit. But here, in this moment, with their son's head resting against Marcus's shoulder and Claire's hand warm in his, they had built something even more precious, a family founded on love, trust, and second chances. The park hero sat prominently displayed in the children's section of the new Riverside Community Center Library. The book's author, Timothy Zhang Walsh, age 9, had insisted on using his full name, proudly embracing both the family he was born into and the one that fate had brought together. The story was simple but profound, a tale of a man who had lost everything but his heart, a woman who discovered that true wealth lay in courage and compassion, and a little boy whose dragon helped build bridges between worlds. Mrs. Rodriguez had contributed the recipes that appeared in the margins, comfort food that had helped heal hearts and build community. But it was the final page that touched readers most deeply. There, beside Timothy's careful drawings of his two fathers, one watching from heaven, one holding his hand on earth, were words that James Zhang had written long ago. The truth has a way of building its own foundation, and in that foundation, a family had found its home.